An important goal of science education is to help students to develop an understanding of concepts and use them to solve problems in new situations. Educating learners to be critical thinkers is vital for the learners themselves and for the society in general. To think critically, learners need to take an active role in learning. This means that learners need to participate in a variety of active thinking processes instead of passively listening to their teachers. Isang natatanging araw sa inyong lahat. I am Jonathan A. Almirante of Nyog Elementary School, and my research title is all about evaluating the use of 7Es Instructional Cycle Model and effective delivery for least learned competencies in Science Grade 3 of Nyog Elementary School, school year 2019 to 2020.
For 3 consecutive school years from 2016 to 2019, least learned competencies in grade 3 level of Nyog Elementary School revealed a very low performance every second quarter. Here are some of the least learned competencies in second quarter for 3 consecutive school years.
The present study was anchored to SDO Bacoor City Program and Project in Science, Project STEP in Scopes. The main purpose of the study was therefore to investigate the effect of 7Es learning cycle as an effective delivery for the least learned competencies in grade 3 science. When the test results manifested, it is a need of crafting of lesson exemplars that utilize 7Es that will be benefited by the learners and eventually the teachers as well. Will the result disclose positive upshot of the intervention to students' learning? Let's find out.
This action research seeks to answer the following questions.
The researcher purposefully chose 20 learners who were utilized 7Es instructional model and 20 learners utilized conventional way of teaching.
The study pursued its target goal of determining the effectiveness of 7Es instructional cycle model in teaching Science 3 by following flow of concepts and actions.
The study utilized descriptive experimental research design, a design which investigates the worthiness of the current investigation. It concerns with identifying any improvement skills of the learners as revealed by the test results reported by the science teacher.
Results and discussion.
Research question number 1. Is there an increment of the post-test over the pre-test result in each section?
Table 1 presents the results of the pre-test and post-test of the control group and experimental group relative to the identified least mastered competencies in Science Grade 3. This implies that there was a positive increase in the scores of the students from the pre-test to the post-test in all identified least mastered competencies when traditional method and 7Es instructional cycle model were used.
Research question number 2. Is there significant difference on the pre-test results of the respondents when grouped according to control group and experimental group?
Table 2 presents the result of the computed t-value between the pre-test results of the control group and experimental group on the 7Es instructional cycle model. This indicates that the performances of control group and experimental group were comparable and coherent before exposure to the 7Es instructional cycle model in addressing the identified least mastered competencies.
Research question number 3. Is there a significant difference between the post-test scores of control group and experimental group?
As you can see, this indicates that the performances of control group and experimental group differ significantly to control group as to the identified least mastered competencies after exposure to the 7Es instructional cycle model in addressing the identified least mastered competencies. Furthermore, it can be noted that the paired differences between post-test of two groups were higher in all identified least mastered competencies in the experimental group, which implies that the use of 7Es instructional cycle method had helped enhance more the performance of the experimental group in learning the least mastered competencies compared to the traditional method.
Research question number 4. Is there a significant difference between the pre-test and post-test of the control group and experimental group?
Table 4 presents the significant difference on results of control group in pre-test and post-test examination in addressing the least mastered competencies using traditional delivery of instruction. This implies that the traditional method was significantly improved the performance scores of the learners from the pre-test to the post-test in terms of identified least mastered competencies. On the other hand, Table 5 presents the significant difference on results of experimental group in pre-test and post-test examination in addressing the least mastered competencies using 7Es instructional cycle model. This implies that the 7Es instructional model was significantly improved the performance scores of the learners from the pre-test to the post-test in terms of identified least mastered competencies. Conclusion. There was a positive increment after addressing the least mastered competencies in Science Grade 3 both in traditional teaching and 7Es instructional cycle model. The performances of control group and experimental group were comparable and coherent before exposure to the 7Es instructional cycle model in addressing the identified least mastered competencies. The performances of control group and experimental group differ significantly as to the identified least mastered competencies after exposure to traditional teaching and the 7Es instructional cycle model. The performance of the experimental group was higher than the traditional teaching. The paired difference before and after addressing the least mastered competencies of Science Grade 3 were significantly improved in both traditional teaching and 7Es instructional cycle model. Implications.
The research made an impact to the learners where they were able to show their multiple intelligences on some varied activities as presented in the crafted DLPs or daily lesson plans. They were able to express their thoughts and whole self in the class discussion and can interact among group activities. The systematic approach made the learners understand the competencies easily. Furthermore, on the part of the science teachers, it was an easy task for them to execute the lesson. The DLPs were ready and all they must do is to execute creatively and religiously.
Recommendation.
The research paper recommends that teachers in the division can adopt 7Es instructional cycle model to help learners master the learning competencies. In addition to that, further study may be conducted in other science competencies to determine its impact.
Report of dissemination and utilization.
The results of the study were presented and disseminated among grade 3 teachers in the City Schools Division of Bacoor.
The researcher created a Facebook group wherein he can communicate, give some suggestions, and get feedback among teachers. E-copy of DLPs were given to the teachers for utilization and proper execution.
The central aim of teaching science today is to promote purposeful addition into the knowledge. To meet this goal, it is pertinent to bridge the gap between the common knowledge, past information, and predictions. Once again, this is Jonathan A. Almirante from Niyog Elementary School. Thank you for listening and have a great day.